It took me just under 4 years to pay off my undergraduate and graduate school student loans, totaling just under $94,000. Let me explain how I did it. If you're new to this channel, my name is Nick Helton and I am a physical therapist. I graduated from Northern Illinois University in May of 2012. I actually did 7 years there and got my master's in physical therapy. I did go on to get my doctorate in physical therapy, but I'm going to save that story for another video. In April of 2016, I made my final payment to Fed loans, paying off the remaining balance of my $94,000 in student loans. I was ecstatic. It was one of the best feelings I've ever experienced. But to be honest, when I graduated in 2012, I couldn't even explain to you what simple terms like APR, principal balance, or interest rate even meant. So how did I pay off my loans in less than 4 years? Let me tell you, to be honest, it was not easy. The first step or the first tip that I want to give you guys is to try to minimize spending. And I know that seems obvious, but I want to talk about how I did it personally. When I graduated, I chose to live with 5 college roommates in an old house that was on campus. Funny story about that house. The first day we actually moved in, we had a knock on the door. There was a cop looking for a suspect because apparently there had been a stabbing in the proximity and there was some kind of trail of blood or something along those lines, that they essentially said they were scouring every house on the block to see if they could find the suspect who fit the witness's description. And that was literally the first day of moving into that place. But to be honest, it was a house, it was roof over my head. It wasn't the best case scenario, but it was something that I could live in and save up a substantial amount of money for my first year out of college. Now I understand finding a low cost of living area is not an option for everybody. There are lots of high cost of living areas across the US and across the world for that matter. I'm about an hour outside of Chicago. If I chose to go about 30 miles closer to Chicago, I would probably be paying 2, maybe 3 times more than what I was paying at that point, just for being in closer proximity to Chicago. So I was in a situation where I could drive an hour to go out to the city and see my friends and go to social events, and that was really my trade-off, which was, my rent and my cost of living being about 1/3 or even 2/3 less than what I'd be paying had I chose to live in the city proper. Now, I moved out of my house when I was 18, and that was the right decision for me, and really a great decision when I look back at it. However, I understand that there are some people who will choose to stay at home or who that's their only option. And if that is, it is at least a good way to save a lot of money in the short term and establish your emergency fund. So let's talk about emergency funds. For this step, I have to give all the credit in the world to Dave Ramsey. By now, I'm sure you've heard of Dave Ramsey or know who he is. Everyone has their own individual faults, but honestly, I feel Dave Ramsey's get out of debt steps are probably the best that you're going to be able to find. I'm just going to put it up on the screen here. My opinion is really that steps 1 through 4 are the most useful in this particular topic that we're discussing in today's video. So Dave Ramsey, step number 1 is establish your $1,000 in your emergency fund. Step 2 is pay off debt using a debt snowball, which is essentially just paying off the smallest debts to the largest debts. Step 3 is 3 to 6 months of savings in expenses. And step 4 is investing 15% into tax-favored accounts. Let me touch on quickly how I established my own emergency fund. I graduated in May of 2012 and I started working as a physical therapist in July of 2012. The sign-on bonus that I got for working as a physical therapist was enough to cover about 3 months of expenses for me. So I took that sign-on bonus and just kept it in the bank. I slowly started adding more and more savings into that until it got to the point where it was 6 months. Now, again, granted for me, my cost of living was quite low at the time, including everything. My utilities, my food, my expenses, everything was quite low. So that was a way that I could establish 6 months without really having to take a really long time and break the bank. After I hit 6 months of savings in the bank, I would then send off every penny over that amount towards my loans. And a quick bit of advice that I wish I would have done a little bit differently now looking back. I was only contributing about 8% of my income to my 401k at that time. I probably should have contributed a little bit more. That's one thing I wish I would have done, is tried to balance my investing with my paying off my debt, kind of a little bit more in a balanced approach. I did, put money towards my 401k, but I do think that I could have gone a little higher. And that's one thing I wish I would have done a little differently, because the long-term payoff is a lot more exponential, especially for investing. And final point, let me touch on the loans themselves. I dug through some of my own loans and found a bill from one of the providers that I had. This on the screen here is from Fed Loans, whom I think had about half of my loans in total. And you can see here the interest rate was 4.5% up to about 6.8%. And one of the things that I wish that I knew when I first started paying off my loans was that with Fed Loans in particular, I could choose the extra amount that I was sending each month. I could choose where that was going. So instead of just taking my money and sort of blanketing my money over the entire loan, which they would, I think, do by default, I could choose to pay off the higher interest loans because they were all individual loans. For example, if you look at the screen here, I have some from 2009 on here, 2010, 2011. Now, obviously, this isn't the entire list. I started college in 2005 and graduated in 2012. This is just one of the sheets that I could find, but I want to use it as an example to kind of show you the percentages of my loans. So I would take all of that money and put it towards the 6.8% and then slowly work my way down, leaving the 4.5% for the last loan that I paid off. And finally, I want to add a little bit of context for everything that I just mentioned. Number one, I know that my total loans are not that high compared to others that I've heard of coming out of college, especially coming out of grad school. I intentionally chose to go to Northern Illinois University for that particular reason, because comparatively, it's a very inexpensive state school. That was a huge priority on my task of how I chose a school, which I'm also going to be making a video about in the future. Number two is don't obsess over how long in particular it takes you to pay off your loan. Everybody is different. We're all individual. We all have different personal finance backgrounds, and don't feel like just because someone did it in a certain amount of time that you have to do it in that amount of time. My opinion is if you can put any amount towards that loan, that is going to help. Even if it's $20 up to a couple $100 a month, whatever you can put towards the loan, just slowly chip away at it, because it will pay off long term in huge dividends. And number three, coming out of school, I was completely clueless about this stuff. Like I cannot even explain to you how little I knew about understanding interest rates, APR, all that kind of stuff. And all I did was listen to podcasts and read a bunch of books. The books that I think impacted me the most, I'm just gonna throw them on the screen. The first one is Rich Dad, Poor Dad, for sort of understanding mindset and getting a better idea of how money works. Dave Ramsey's Total Money Makeover, which is a fantastic book for anyone in debt. So I think that that's probably the best book for student loans or someone who maybe has a lot of credit card debt or just debt in general that you're having a hard time organizing. The third one I can recommend is Tony Robbins' Money Master the Game. That's a fantastic book just in that he interviews a lot of people who have made substantial amounts of money, and it's sort of how they manage their money. It's a great long-term book. It may not help you necessarily get out of debt tomorrow, but I think it's a great book for understanding sort of long-term prospects and kind of how to categorize that. And then finally, Get a Financial Life, Personal Finance in Your 20s and 30s. I think it's a great book, especially if that appeals to you and you're in that age group. Now, those are all books that helped me. If you have any recommendations or suggestions for books that help you from a personal finance standpoint, drop a comment below and let me know which ones you found to be helpful in your own individual path. I hope that this video has helped someone out there. If you did find some value from this or you did find it interesting, please help me out by leaving a like or subscribing to my channel. Thank you so much for watching the video. Please shoot me a message on Instagram if you want to ask me a question directly. I appreciate you guys for watching.